Hi, so I'm making a video kind of explaining the tail wag animation that I have, and I also am going to kind of explain how I have it interacting with my Headpat. Whenever someone comes up to pat me on the head, it'll actually make my tail wag faster. So to start off here, I'll just kind of show the animation that I actually have for my tail wag, which is just these keyframes here that I redid for the original Hopkin tail wag. So I used to use the tail wag that came with the Hopkin, but I created this animation just to kind of give it a little bit more life to the actual tail wag itself. This in no way is like a clean way of setting up your keyframes and such for a tail wag. But it is what I ended up doing 5 or 6 months ago when I recreated the tail wag. So this is kind of what I have, and what I ended up doing is trying to make this tail wag look as natural as it possibly could without dynamic bones or fizz bones, so that with the actual fizz bones or dynamic bones, it will look a lot better. So this is kind of the animation without any dynamic bones. It's still stiff, and like you can see it's still kind of a rigid animation, but I tried to give it a little bit of inertia so that whenever the tail is changing directions, it'll kind of whip it back the other way as it switches directions. Gives it kind of a clean look. It's not perfect, but you know, it gets the job done. And then what I can show you here is the tail wag with the fizz bones. So this is using fizz bones from the Avatar Dynamics. And you can see that the fizz bones just kind of loosen it up a little bit so that the overall animation looks a lot smoother. It looks a lot more natural. And that's kind of why I animated in those like movements of it flicking the end of the tail back and forth, is just to kind of give it a little bit more life to the tail wag. Because realistically, if you want to make a simple tail wag, you could come in here and you could just animate the base tail back and forth here. But I had a little bit more fun with it, and I went through and I actually animated each tail itself, each bone itself and the tail, to give it just a little bit more life here. Another thing to look at is when you create an animation like this, an easy way to do this, and this is what I did, is say you come to like 1 second here for your keyframes, and I just clicked the record button, and when I went in, if you press like E here, you'll go to the rotation mode, and if you just move this, you can see it just recorded the keyframe for the tail rotation. And then if I rotate this again, it records it for tail rotation 2, and then record it again, and it records the tail rotation for 3. And I went through and I just created this motion that I liked keyframing. And this wasn't like I just went through and liked these one at a time and like nailed it each time. Like I went through and tweaked these as I did it. And then once you go down through all of your tail bones and you like where they're at, if you just hit this right here, it'll actually toss in your position and everything as well. So you're also updating your position and your animation. I'm going to go ahead and Control Z these just so I don't have these changes in my animation. But that right there is how I went through and created each of these keyframes that you're seeing down here. And you can see some of them broken because they don't actually have the position, but I do recommend just tossing in the position just to make sure things are looking how you want them to. Another big aspect of this is that this first keyframe is exactly the same as this last keyframe. Now the reason that I did this is so that this can loop and look clean, because if it goes to the end here and then we go back to the first frame, you can see nothing changed. So it'll loop right back into that inertia that it's built from that swing here, right? Because it swings and then it resets right here, right? And that inertia that it had from that initial swing builds right back into the initial first part of this tail wag that I had. And so that's something to keep in mind, is when you're getting to the end of your tail wag, you want to make it look like it's looping right into the beginning of your tail wag. And then one other thing before I go into the animator logic here is once you've created your animation here, which this is the hardest part of all of it, just getting an animation that you really like. Once you've set this up, you just want to click this top first keyframe here, and you'll want to shift click this last keyframe, your last keyframe here in your tail wag animation, or whatever animation you're creating here that's just an idle animation. And when you do this, it'll select everything in between. And when you go here, you want to go to free smooth and select this. And what this does is it essentially makes the tangent curves between one keyframe to another smooth. And I can show you this with the curves here. Don't let this overwhelm you. It's just basically the tangent curves for how each keyframe is transitioning from one to the other. And you can see how it's smooth. You see how these lines are smoothly transitioning back and forth. If I were to go back here and I do, let's do both tangents linear, you're going to see very rigid, like it's snapping from one to the other. And this won't make a massive difference in your animation, but I would suggest just going to free smooth so that it'll make sure that you're having a clean movement between one keyframe to another. It's not the end of the world if you don't do this, but it just helps keep things a little bit cleaner whenever you're doing it. So now let's move on to the actual animations themselves inside of the animator. So right here I have, and you can ignore these two animations. What you'll end up having is just like your tail wag animation, or maybe like idle ears twitching kind of animation. But whatever you have your animation here, the idle one that you're wanting to work with. And so what I did is I set my speed for this tail wag to 2.5. So it plays at 2.5 times the normal speed, which realistically would be really fast if it initially just played like this off the bat. What I ended up doing is creating a parameter that's called tail speed, this parameter right here, and it's a float. And basically what happens is this tail speed layer right here that I have an animation created that will change the tail speed float that we have. So I'm trying to make sure we get everything here. So this animation changes the tail speed float. So our tail speed float, it changes it to 0.25, right? So our tail speed float is constantly sitting at 0.25. And if you remember in our layer here, our 2.5 times speed is multiplied by our tail speed float. So it's multiplied, 2.5 is multiplied by 0.25, which is like 0.62 or something along those lines for the speed. So this animation's actually running at 0.62 speed, not 2.5 right now. But if we go back over here and we look at the transition into tail speed 1, or into tail 1, its headpats is greater than 0.05. So when someone starts to headpat me, it will set my float for headpats to greater than 0.05, which means it plays this animation. And this animation here sets my tail speed float to 1, meaning that now my animation's playing at 2.5 times speed. So it speeds it up and makes it look faster. So really quick, I will show you what this looks like. And you can, again, just kind of ignore these other animations. They're just for other things that I have on my avatar here for like being worried and stuff like that. So if we grab our tester here, if you press W, you can swap to the XYZ axis of just moving around here. And so if we move our sender here onto my head, what you're going to see is, you see how this is going relatively slow. When this sender goes on top of my head, it's going to speed up. So watch this here. Now you see how it's sped up and it's going a lot faster. And that's because our tail speed float is at 1 right now. And if we take it off, it goes to 0.5. I think the animation might have been mislabeled, but it goes to 0.5. And so this animation slows down. We put our hand back on our head, and it goes back to 1, meaning this animation plays at 2.5 times speed again. And so you can see we're just reusing the same animation we had before without having to transition to some other animation. The reason that I did this is that I could create another animation that's a faster tail wag if I wanted to, like put in the work for that. But I run the risk of transitioning between the actual animations themselves being a little bit like not clean. Say like my tail wag is right here, and my happy tail wag that's faster starts over here or something, then it's got to transition from here back to here, and then maybe it's already going this way, so it could look kind of rigid and weird in between the two different animations. So I found it easier just to speed up my animation that I already had going, because it looks cleaner and you're not going from one spot to another, you're just increasing the speed at which your animation is moving. And so this is how I do my tail wag animation. It's relatively simple. I'm just using a couple different floats to change the different speed for my animation. And that's pretty much it. The hardest part of this really is just making the tail wag itself. The keyframing and such for that can be kind of a pain. As you can see, there's not a ton of keyframes here, but there's a few. And realistically, I could make this a lot cleaner if I wanted to, and I probably will end up going back through and remaking this animation. But this is generally how my tail wag works. You can just see here. You just want to go through and drop in a keyframe, and again, I didn't go through like specific intervals and set these. I just kind of moved things around a little bit that made this look smoother. Probably not the best way to go about it. It's probably better to have like increments of 1 second or 2 seconds or something along those lines to actually make this look a little bit cleaner and smoother. But your mileage may vary depending on what you're doing. But this is generally how I have my tail wag set up and how I have my head pat set up as well. So if you guys have any questions about this, or anything else that I'm doing, putting out tutorials for the lightsaber, as well as a couple other things that I have planned, like potentially might make a tutorial for the nut button, and some other stuff that I'm working on as well. So if you guys have questions on these things, or anything about how I did the tail wag for this avatar, just put them down in the comments below, and I'll do the best that I can to answer y'all's questions. If you guys want more detailed guides than just general overviews, like step by step instead of how to do these things, I can do that. I just try to gauge between longer videos and shorter videos that kind of get to the point. But I'm more than happy to sit here and spend time running through step by step how to do these things. It just depends on what exactly everyone is wanting to see out of these tutorials. So let me know in the comments down below if you guys want more detailed tutorials or if these are exactly what you guys want. Thanks for watching.